Hi everyone, welcome back. We are doing game reviews again with Chess with Naz. I want to show you a game today that I had played, Rapid Game, which I really shouldn't have won, but but uh like I said before, I stuck through it. I didn't resign, and eventually, I mean the engine didn't like my position already. I saw that in the review, and I was under pressure, but this one moment completely changed the game. And I want to show you that. So today, this was my position. I was playing black. This started off with a Rui Lopez, and this is how we ended up. I had originally sacrificed a pawn in this game, which I get back in this position. But I'll show you where I kind of I'm down already. Like the engine already believes that white is winning slightly, but there's some situations that happen where suddenly I should have gone there. I should have moved my pawn there. And now, like there's not accurate moves going on over here, folks. There's clearly not accurate moves going on here. Time pressure, like there was uh, a lot of anxiousness throughout the game. So yeah, so I gave up that pawn to take this pawn, which this was more concerning to me. This pawn over here, moving all the way down over here and actually becoming a queen over here. So that was more concerning to me, and that's why I took that pawn. I was more curious and concerned about that pawn actually. But but now I have two pawns and my opponent has one, two, three pawns. I'm at a disadvantage, and the engine bar already shows you that. Here's what happened though. So the engine is not saying that white's gonna win, even though they're up a piece. I had to be very meticulous and very careful in making sure I made the correct moves. Uh, I moved my pawn up, going for my pawn. I have to defend it. It's a great move, sure. White moves their rook back to defend it. I move my rook up to attack the pawn. Pawn moves up. Uh, Rook up. I take the pawn. White takes my pawn. I have to move my king away. Uh, White's trying to check me and trying to get my pawn out of the way, basically. Now, realistically, here, it's not easy, but it's possible for black to win. Possible. But with white's rook over here now, watching this square, here comes the real problem. I can't push this pawn up because white will just take it. Uh, Even if I have my king over here defending this pawn, white can take this pawn and I can't take back with the king because this pawn technically is giving a check. Even though it's pinned, my king will go on the check, so I can't take that pawn with my king. So my king cannot be a defender for that. My rook cannot be a defender unless I move my rook over there. But I still try because I want to make sure that I want to have to bring my rook over here at some point. So it'll be first defender, second defender. Uh, Black moves up. Sorry, white moves up. I moved my rook there, and this was the bad move on my part. I should have blocked the pawn from coming down here, but even if I had gone over here, white would easily have just gone all the way here, and then there was nothing stopping the pawn from moving, advancing one by one to the next square. Uh, Having said that, white blundered too. Here's why. We go back and forth. There's some inaccuracies over here. Yes, this is happening all the while. I'm putting pressure. I'm not going to move my king away from there. I want to make sure that my king stays there. So now white could have taken this, and then I have to take back, and then they take back, and then it's just game over for me. But instead, I moved up. So here's where we are, right? So white moves up with the intent that they're going to take this pawn, and that's what's going to happen. My choice was, well, if I take this pawn, uh, I'm going to have to, I'm going to lose this pawn to this, and then I have nothing else right now. I just have to protect this pawn from getting to this square here. And that's going to be very tedious given that white already has a rook. The best I could expect is a draw. Here's how I convert it. I didn't take. And the engine doesn't like my move. I know the engine doesn't like my move. The engine preferred this move because, let's take it down for a second. If I move here, the engine takes this, I take the rook back. And then at some point, king moves here, pawn moves, sorry, my pawn moves here, giving a check, king moves back over here, and then at some point, I can kind of move up over here. But it's not easy. It's not easy, it's not possible. So we're over here right now. I move my pawn up, and here is the turning point. White moves his rook to give me a check. I move out of the way. White's winning now, by the way. White's winning. Quite significantly, white's up by 4.2. But I make this move here because I want to block out this over here. If I'm going to lose this pawn, then I'm going to make sure that this pawn doesn't get further easy access to actually becoming a queen. Here is where things go wrong. We go up, and now here I am almost at the cusp of becoming a queen. This is where white needed to be very, very careful with what their next move was going to be. Any move would have been fine. This move would have been fine. Possibly maybe this move would have been fine. But what white did was very strange, because they brought their king out thinking, they're going to bring some attack over here if they move their king over here, and then they can potentially have an attack over here and bring it down this way, whatever. I move my king up. Engine still doesn't like my position. White moves their king up, which is now a blunder because they've actually left their rook unprotected. So I get closer to the rook. Position is still even. Keep in mind, the position here, the bar is showing it's a completely equal position, even though I'm pawn down, but I'm so close to the queening line that I'm in a better position because of that, because of being one pawn down. White needed to make sure that they moved anywhere but away from this, from allowing me to move my pawn away. And that's essentially what white's winning move was, to keep the pressure on this pawn and not lose that. This was already blunder. Moving the king away was already a blunder. But here's what white did instead. Yeah. So white moved their rook all the way over here, hoping to defend this pawn. But they forgot that my pawn over here is so close to queening. Whatever I do with this rook now needs to be very important that it actually impacts white's ability to move. So I move my rook to here. And this is where my opponent abandoned the game. Here's why this is a great move, and here's why this made sure that I won the game, because this pawn is the only pawn that can advance. So no longer can this pawn advance because I'm just going to take it now with my rook or my king. But even, let's say, for instance, if the opponent brought their king over here, if their opponent brought their king over here, then even then I could still take this pawn. I could still take this pawn with my rook, even with the king over there, unless the opponent brought their rook over here. But all of that we're forgetting is, aside from the fact that my pawn can now become a queen at any point over here. And there is nothing the opponent can do, even if my opponent tried to now bring their rook back over here somehow, or brought their rook over here and tried to sacrifice it. Whatever they did, nothing is stopping my pawn from queening now. And that is why my opponent just resigned. So this is, again, another lesson, folks, in realizing don't quit games. I was down by one pawn, and it was a tough position for me, but meticulous moves, calculated moves, and checking to see what the next few moves could possibly be really helped me out. And before you knew it, I had my pawn on the second rank, and it was ready to become a queen, and my opponent could do nothing about it, even though they had a rook and two pawns. So don't quit games. I guess that's the moral here, is don't quit games. You can find a win or force the checkmate. Force your opponent to find the checkmate behind, but don't quit games. That's everything for today, folks. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks. See you again.